Some cars were born from bad ideas. Others started off with promise and derailed into disasters. But these 9 models, they made it to production, somehow, despite glaring flaws in design, purpose, or common sense. You probably haven't seen them before, and honestly, that's a blessing.
Dear viewer, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for your support.
Number 9. The 1973 Volkswagen Thing. Known in Germany as the Kugelwagen, originally derived from a World War II military vehicle and sold in America simply as the Thing, this quirky, boxy contraption looked like a DIY dune buggy built by an army surplus store. It was a car that confused the public, amused some buyers, and eventually became a cult classic. But beneath the charm was a vehicle that was equal parts fascinating and frustrating. The Volkswagen Thing was derived from the Type 181, which itself was a descendant of the World War II-era Kugelwagen, the German equivalent of the U.S. Army's Jeep. Designed in the late 1960s for NATO use, the Type 181 wasn't meant for mainstream buyers at all. But in the early 1970s, Volkswagen realized there was a niche market in the United States for cheap, rugged, oddball off-roaders. So they slapped on some headlights, met the bare minimum safety requirements, and imported it under the name The Thing, starting in 1973. It looked like a military vehicle someone accidentally left on the beach. The Volkswagen Thing's styling was, to put it gently, utilitarian. With flat panels, exposed door hinges, removable doors, and a fold-down windshield, it looked like it was welded together in someone's garage using refrigerator doors and leftover fencing. Body: angular, open, and completely utilitarian, perfect for hosing down, but not for impressing your neighbors. Roof: a plastic fabric soft top that folded like a tent in a windstorm. Doors: removable, light, and about as protective as a screen door. Interior: no luxury, no sound insulation, and no complaints if you tracked in mud. It was expected. Everything screamed military surplus yard on wheels. Under the boxy shell, the Thing was mostly Volkswagen Beetle. Engine: rear-mounted, air-cooled 1.6-liter flat-4 engine producing around 46 horsepower. Transmission: 4-speed manual. Suspension: Beetle-based torsion bars, simple but rugged. Drivetrain: rear-wheel drive only despite looking like an off-roader. It had no 4WD, no power anything, and the engine sounded like a coffee grinder. But it was easy to maintain and parts were everywhere. It wasn't fast, and it wasn't particularly good off-road, but it was durable and simple. Driving a Volkswagen Thing was an experience. Not a good or bad one, just a weird one. Acceleration: sluggish, a 0 to 60 time somewhere between eventually and maybe tomorrow. Noise: everything rattled. The engine buzzed behind you, the wind roared, you heard every pebble under the tires. Comfort: none. You sat on a hard bench with vinyl that burned your skin in summer and cracked in winter. Safety: minimal. In a crash, the Thing would fold like a cardboard box. But none of this mattered to buyers who loved its charm. It was an anti-car, a vehicle that didn't try to be anything it wasn't. Volkswagen sold the Thing in the US from 1973 to 1974. It attracted surfers, campers, hippies, and off-road tinkerers. But a few things doomed its commercial future. New US safety regulations. The Thing didn't meet upcoming crash or emission standards. Poor winter performance. No insulation and no heater made it brutal in cold climates. Price creep. It wasn't that cheap once equipped, and buyers expected more for their money. Too weird. Mainstream buyers were baffled by it. Production for the US ended in 1975, though the Thing continued on in Mexico and Europe for several more years. Despite its short life, the Volkswagen Thing became a cult favorite. Collectors now love them for their rarity and quirky looks. Restorers enjoy their simplicity, flat body panels, basic mechanics, and easy part availability. Off-roaders and beachgoers still enjoy them as low-speed toys. Today, you'll see well-maintained things at car shows, beaches, and vintage Volkswagen meetups, often painted in bright colors and customized with surf racks or oversized tires. The 1973 Volkswagen Thing was never a good car in the traditional sense. It was slow, uncomfortable, crude, and weird. But it wasn't trying to be a sedan or even a Jeep. It was trying to be fun and unique, and it succeeded in doing just that. It was a car for people who didn't want a normal car. A car that said, "I don't care what my neighbors drive." A box on wheels with charm, flaws, and an unapologetically strange identity. In a world full of generic vehicles, the Volkswagen Thing still stands out. Not because it was great, but because it dared to be different. Number 8. The 1979 Dodge St. Regis. On paper, it was meant to replace the outgoing Monaco as the brand's flagship sedan. A modern, full-size car that could compete with the shrinking, fuel-conscious, big sedans of GM and Ford. In practice, it was underpowered, underwhelming, and unwanted by nearly everyone, including the police departments it was supposed to impress. This is the story of how the St. Regis became a laughingstock in the full-size segment, an unloved placeholder for a company on the brink. To understand the failure of the Dodge St. Regis, you have to understand Chrysler's situation in the late 1970s. The company was teetering on bankruptcy, bleeding money, and behind on downsizing compared to General Motors and Ford. As the oil crises of 1973 and 1979 hammered demand for thirsty full-size sedans, Chrysler was caught flat-footed. Their stopgap solution? Take an aging platform, tweak the styling, and market it as something new. That was the St. Regis. The 1979 Dodge St. Regis was introduced as Dodge's new full-size car, replacing the Monaco in name. But underneath, it was basically a warmed-over version of Chrysler's old R-body platform, itself derived from the even older B-body architecture that dated back to the early 1960s. Platform: Chrysler R-body, shared with Plymouth Grand Fury and Chrysler Newport. Wheelbase: 118.5 inches. Length: 220.2 inches. Engines: slant 6, 225 cubic inch in a full-size sedan, 318 VA, 360 VA, 225 horsepower, 364 barrel for police pursuit versions. Still inadequate. Though marketed as modern and efficient, the St. Regis was more a Frankenstein of old parts and outdated thinking. Stylistically, the St. Regis was as uninspired as its engineering. It wore a generic three-box shape that looked like every other boxy car from the late 70s, only less refined. Front end: hidden headlights and a flat, upright grille gave it a faux luxury appearance. Body panels: shared with other R-bodies, cost-cutting in action. Rear styling: forgettable, with big chrome bumpers and nothing to write home about. Trim levels: SE versions added vinyl roofs, opera windows, and more fake luxury. While Ford had the fresh LTD and GM had properly downsized Caprices and Bonnevilles, Chrysler was pushing reheated leftovers and hoping nobody would notice. One of the most damning aspects of the St. Regis was its engine lineup. In a desperate bid to improve fuel economy and meet CAF, corporate average fuel economy regulations, Dodge offered the base model with, believe it or not, a 225 cubic inch slant 6, an engine better suited for compact economy cars. The larger 318 and 360 VAs were available, but heavily strangled by smog equipment and emissions regulations, producing anemic horsepower figures for a 4,000-plus live vehicle. Dodge tried to market the St. Regis to police departments with a pursuit version that included the 195 to 225 horsepower 360 VA, beefed-up suspension, and better cooling. But it failed spectacularly. Top speed: struggled to reach 120 miles per hour, unacceptable for pursuit use. Acceleration: sluggish even when floored. Handling: poorly balanced with floaty suspension and vague steering. Reliability: suffered from overheating, transmission failures, and electrical issues. Police officers reportedly refused to drive them. Some departments canceled their orders altogether. When it hit showrooms in 1979, the public mostly ignored the St. Regis. It didn't offer anything new, exciting, or particularly good. Buyers saw right through Chrysler's attempt to sell an old platform in new clothing. Problems included outdated design, poor fuel economy despite being downsized, sluggish performance, reliability issues, no innovation. It wasn't helped by the fact that 1979 also marked the height of the second fuel crisis, and buyers were already gravitating towards smaller, more efficient imports and mid-size cars. Despite some initial fleet sales, largely to government and police agencies, the St. Regis never caught on with private buyers. It lasted only 3 model years, 1979 through 1981, before being discontinued with little fanfare. By 1981, Dodge had shifted its focus to front-wheel drive platforms like the K-cars, and the St. Regis faded into obscurity. Its role as a full-size offering was eventually filled by the much more successful Dodge Diplomat, though even that was no blockbuster. Today, the St. Regis is almost completely forgotten. It has no enthusiast following, it was never desirable, collectible, or particularly memorable. You almost never see one at a car show, unless it's wearing faded fleet colors and rust. It's remembered, if at all, for being one of Chrysler's weakest full-size offerings, nearly destroying Dodge's credibility with police departments, representing everything wrong with Detroit's late 70s complacency. The 1979 Dodge St. Regis was supposed to be a modern answer to changing market demands, a downsized, more efficient full-size car. Instead, it was a cheap repackaging of old hardware dressed up with fake luxury and fake promises. It failed to capture public interest, it failed with law enforcement, and it failed to keep Dodge relevant in the large car market during a critical era. If ever there was a car that defined Chrysler's desperation before the arrival of Lee Iacocca and the minivan, it was the Dodge St. Regis, a forgotten full-size flop that lived up to none of its full-size promises. Number 7. The 1976 Triumph Stag was designed to be a British answer to the Mercedes-Benz SL, a stylish, luxurious convertible for the upmarket GT crowd. On paper, it had all the right ingredients: a 2+2 convertible layout, handsome Michelotti styling, and a throaty V8 engine developed in-house by Triumph. Unfortunately, what should have been a world-class roadster became infamous for breakdowns, overheating, and a reputation that ultimately helped doom Triumph itself. Introduced in 1970 and continuing through 1977, the Stag was penned by Italian design legend Giovanni Michelotti. It had sleek, balanced proportions with a low stance and clean lines, a T-bar roof design added to increase rigidity and meet U.S. rollover standards, a removable hardtop and a soft convertible top, flexibility for touring, chrome accents and elegant detailing, marking it as a premium product. It looked every bit the sophisticated European GT. Buyers could imagine cruising the Riviera or the California coast in one. It was aspirational. At the heart of the Stag was Triumph's own 3.0-liter SOHC V8, an ambitious but problematic engine. It was meant to be the centerpiece of a whole family of engines, but in practice, it became the car's biggest liability. Major problems included overheating. The aluminum heads warped easily. Poor cooling system design and subpar maintenance tolerance led to frequent failures. Timing chain issues. Early versions used a weak chain tensioner, which could cause catastrophic engine failure. Electrics and build quality. Lucas Electrics and inconsistent British Leyland assembly standards meant frequent electrical gremlins and quality control nightmares. Many owners found their dream cars stuck on the roadside with steam pouring out of the HUD. Despite the V8, performance was only moderate. 0 to 60 miles per second, around 9.3 seconds. Decent but not breathtaking. Top speed, about 117 miles per hour. Horsepower, around 145 horsepower net. The Stag wasn't meant to be a sports car, it was a GT cruiser. But even in that role, the mechanical failures often took center stage. Though it had potential, the Stag never caught on, especially in the US where it was meant to shine. Reliability woes and poor support from British Leyland dealerships torpedoed its reputation. Only 25,877 units were built in total. Less than 3,000 were sold in the US, despite the car being developed with that market in mind. Most US spec cars ended up with modifications or engine swaps just to keep them running. The Stag's failure had a ripple effect. It hurt Triumph's brand credibility at a time when Japanese automakers were rising. It undermined British Leyland's attempt to compete globally in the premium market. The Stag is now seen as a symbol of great ideas ruined by poor execution and internal politics. That said, today, the Triumph Stag has a cult following. With modern cooling upgrades and rebuilt engines, they can be made reliable, and they remain some of the best-looking convertibles of the 1970s. The 1976 Triumph Stag was a car that should have been great, a V8-powered luxury tourer with Italian looks and British charm. But instead of challenging Mercedes, it became a cautionary tale. Plagued by mechanical fragility and corporate mismanagement, the Stag's legacy is less about what it achieved and more about what it could have been. For car enthusiasts and historians, it's a beautiful failure and a reminder that even the best ideas can overheat if they're not built right. Number 6. The 1986 Alfa Romeo Milano, sold as the 75 in Europe, was Alfa's last rear-wheel drive sedan before Fiat took full control of the company. It was a car filled with technical wizardry and dramatic Italian flair, launched at a time when Alfa Romeo was trying desperately to compete with BMW in the compact executive car market. While it showed promise in driving dynamics and innovation, it was marred by dreadful build quality, reliability issues, and questionable styling. A bold design, and a polarizing one. The Milano/75 was unmistakably Alfa Romeo, angular, sharp, and a little awkward. Exterior design. Designed by Ercole Spada at IDEA Institute, the Milano had a wedge shape, abrupt rear end, and unusual detailing like black plastic cladding and an asymmetrical C-pillar. Interior. The dashboard was aggressively angled toward the driver, with bizarre ergonomics. Buttons were scattered in non-intuitive places. The speedometer and tach had oddly shaped needles. Ergonomics. Window switches between the seats. HVAC sliders placed where you'd expect radio controls. It looked futuristic, but felt like an afterthought in usability. You could admire the ambition, but few would call it elegant or user-friendly. Engineering weirdness or brilliance? The Milano wasn't just another sedan. It was packed with quirky engineering meant to deliver near-perfect balance and handling. Rear transaxle. The transmission was located at the rear along with the clutch and differential. This gave the Milano a nearly 50-50 weight distribution, like a race car. DD-on rear suspension. A semi-independent design that offered great handling while keeping the rear wheels well controlled, rare in a sedan. Inboard rear brakes. Mounted near the differential to reduce unsprung weight. Great in theory, in practice, a nightmare to service. Torsion bar front suspension. Unconventional, but compact and effective for packaging. This all made the Milano surprisingly agile and sharp to drive, especially the top trim Milano Verde, which had a 3.0 V6. Performance. Depending on trim, performance ranged from respectable to exciting. Base Milano Silver, 2.5-liter V6, around 154 horsepower, 0 to 60 mph in circa 8.5 seconds. Milano Verde, 3.0 Busso V6 with 183 horsepower, 0 to 60 in about 7.5 seconds, a thrilling engine with a growl that earned legendary status. Handling was the car's strong suit. Despite its odd layout, it felt nimble and communicative, capable of keeping up with BMWs of the time in the corners. But then, the build quality. Here's where it all fell apart, often literally. Interior trim. Switchgear broke. Panels rattled. The dash warped in the sun. Door handles could come off in your hand. Electronics. The Milano had advanced electronics for the time, including a diagnostic display and digital sensors, all of which were unreliable. Rust. Though better than older Alfas, some Milanos still developed rust in vulnerable areas. Dealer support. Alfa's US network was weak. Parts were hard to get. Mechanics weren't trained to service the transaxle layout or weird suspension. Fit and finish. Uneven panel gaps, misaligned doors, squeaky seats. It felt more like a prototype than a production vehicle. It was a car you had to love, because it certainly wouldn't love you back with constant maintenance. The end of an era. The Milano's 1986 to 1980 US run was short-lived. Competing against the BMW 3 Series, Audi 80, and Mercedes 190e, the Milano felt underdeveloped and overly eccentric. Alfa's already shaky reputation in the US worsened as buyers became frustrated with reliability. By 1995, Alfa Romeo completely withdrew from the American market, not returning until the 2010s. The Milano was the last rear-wheel drive Alfa sedan until the 2017 Giulia. Legacy. Today, the Alfa Romeo Milano is a cult classic. For those who can maintain them and find parts, it offers a rewarding analog driving experience. The Busso V6 is a gem, one of the best-sounding six-cylinders ever made. The transaxle layout and suspension make it uniquely satisfying to drive. Enthusiasts appreciate its quirks as character, not flaws. But for the average buyer in the 1980s, it was simply too weird and too unreliable. The 1986 Alfa Romeo Milano was an Italian sports sedan that tried to outthink and outdrive the competition. And in many ways, it did, with its advanced layout and engaging dynamics. But its abysmal build quality, electronics issues, and chaotic interior design turned it into a niche product rather than a breakthrough success. In the end, the Milano was a car that promised a lot but couldn't deliver consistently. It was brilliant, in spurts, but for most owners, it became more of a heartbreak than a joyride.
Number 5. The 1983 Renault Alliance was supposed to be a game-changer, a fusion of French efficiency and American practicality. Built in America, engineered in France, and intended to compete with the rising tide of fuel-efficient imports, the Alliance was a bold attempt to modernize the American compact car segment. Instead, it became a textbook case of how good ideas can go horribly wrong when cost-cutting, mismatched cultures, and quality control issues collide. Background: the French invasion of AMC. In the late 1970s, American Motors Corporation, AMC, was desperate for a lifeline. Sales were down, its lineup was aging, and it lacked the money to develop new models. Enter Renault, the French automaker known for quirky, efficient small cars. In 1979, Renault bought a controlling interest in AMC and promised to inject European style and engineering into the American market. The Alliance was the first fruit of this transatlantic partnership. Design and development. The 1983 Renault Alliance was essentially a Renault 9 rebadged and built in AMC's Kenosha, Wisconsin plant. Body style: front-wheel drive, two-door or four-door sedan. Platform: compact with an upright greenhouse and unremarkable styling. It was clearly European in design, efficient but dull. Interior: Spartan but decently roomy for a small car. Some models had soft cloth seats and faux wood, others had cheap plastic and confusing controls. What made the Alliance unique at the time was its European feel in an American package, small, light, and nimble compared to bloated domestic sedans. The powertrain, all sizzle, no steak. Under the hood, the Alliance featured Renault's aging mechanicals. Base engine, 1.4-liter inline-4 with just 64 horsepower. Transmission, a 4-speed manual, later 5-speed, or a 3-speed automatic that sucked what little life the engine had. Fuel economy, promoted as a strong point, up to 40 mpg highway in EPA tests, but real-world results were often lower. Performance was anemic. 0 to 60 miles per hour took well over 13 seconds, even in the manual. Hills were a challenge, highway merges were nerve-wracking, and passing, don't even think about it. Even worse, the engines were prone to oil leaks, overheating, and timing chain issues, a nightmare for owners who expected the low cost to mean low maintenance. Handling and driving experience. Initially, some reviewers were impressed. The Alliance had a supple, compliant ride by American standards, sharp steering thanks to its light weight, disc brakes up front. But that praise faded fast once the build quality and reliability problems began to show. Early models squeaked, rattled, and literally fell apart after just a few years. Quality control nightmare. Here's where the Alliance truly failed. Build quality. Panels didn't fit right. Paint flaked early. Seats tore. Door handles broke off. Water leaked into the cabin. Electrical gremlins. The fuse box was a mess. Lights failed without warning, and accessories had minds of their own. Interior trim. Cheap plastic and upholstery materials disintegrated under sunlight or repeated use. Rust. Even though it was built in America, it rusted like it was from 1960s Europe. Wheel wells and floor pans were notorious rot spots. In short, the Alliance aged like milk. By the time owners paid off their loans, most cars were junkyard ready. Strangely, it won awards. In an ironic twist of fate, the 1983 Renault Alliance won Motor Trend's Car of the Year. Why? Likely because it represented something different at a time when American automakers were stuck in the past. It offered European handling, impressive fuel economy on paper, and a sub-$6,000 price tag. But the award aged poorly. Critics later called it one of the worst Car of the Year picks ever. Variants and final years. Despite its problems, AMC tried to milk the Alliance name. Alliance Convertible, one of the cheapest convertibles sold in America. Flimsy top, underpowered engine, comical road presence. Encore hatchback, a cousin of the Alliance, even uglier and no more reliable. GTA model, a last-ditch sporty version with a 1.7-liter engine. Still slow, still unreliable. By 1987, the Alliance was dead. AMC itself followed shortly after, absorbed by Chrysler in 1988. Legacy. Today, the Renault Alliance is remembered mostly as a punchline. A case study in what happens when two automakers with very different philosophies try to collaborate. Proof that fuel economy alone doesn't sell cars, especially if the rest of the package falls apart. A reminder that Motor Trend awards don't guarantee long-term greatness. Very few Alliances have survived. They were rarely preserved, often junked, and hardly mourned. You'll almost never see one at a classic car show, unless someone's being ironic. Conclusion. The 1983 Renault Alliance was a noble idea brought down by execution. AMC and Renault thought they could fuse European efficiency with American manufacturing, but instead created a car that combined the worst traits of both cultures: underpowered, poorly built, and tragically unreliable. While it tried to offer a smarter, more efficient compact car to American buyers, the Alliance ultimately became a cautionary tale of how not to build a world car, and a reminder that good intentions aren't enough if the result is built like garbage.
Number 4. In 1985, Ford's Lincoln Mercury division introduced an unusual new car with a strange name, Merkur XR4Ti. Built in Germany, sold through Mercury dealers, and based on a successful European performance hatchback, the XR4Ti was supposed to challenge sporty imports like BMW and Audi. Instead, it confused buyers, frustrated mechanics, and disappeared within a few years, despite having solid performance credentials. The XR4Ti was the right car at the wrong time, wearing the wrong badge with a name that sounded like a serial number. Background: the birth of Merkur. By the early 1980s, Ford realized that Japanese and European automakers were cutting into its market share, especially with compact, sporty sedans and hatchbacks. BMW, Volkswagen, and Audi were pulling in younger, performance-minded buyers. Rather than build a whole new car from scratch, Ford chose to import an existing European model. The car they picked? The Ford Sierra XR4i, a well-regarded hatchback sold in Europe under the Ford of Europe brand. In America, it couldn't be called a Ford, so they created a new European brand under Lincoln Mercury, Merkur, pronounced Merkur. The name was German for Mercury. Clever, right? Except nobody got the reference, and the name sounded like it belonged on a spacecraft. Design and features. The XR4Ti was visually striking. Hatchback coupe body with flowing lines and a long hood. Biplane rear spoiler, two wings stacked on the rear hatch that looked aerodynamic but felt out of place in suburbia. Flush headlights, clamshell hood, and Euro-style plastic bumpers that clashed with 1980s American styling. It didn't look like anything else on the road, and for some buyers, that was a problem. The interior was also European. Supportive bucket seats, a driver-focused cockpit with strange switches, lots of hard plastic and questionable ergonomics. The climate control system was a bizarre mix of American and European parts that often didn't work properly. Powertrain and performance. Under the hood, the XR4Ti had a turbocharged 2.3-liter inline-4, the same basic engine found in the Mustang SVO and Thunderbird Turbo Coupe. Horsepower: 175 horsepower manual, 145 horsepower automatic. Torque: a strong 200 pound-foot. Transmission: 5-speed manual or 3-speed automatic. Drivetrain: rear-wheel drive. Suspension: fully independent with rear trailing arms, rare for an American-sold car at the time. Performance was impressive. 0 to 60 miles per hour in around 7.5 seconds, manual. Top speed near 130 miles per hour. Excellent handling balance with responsive steering and minimal body roll. So, what went wrong? Almost everything else. Problems and confusion. Despite strong specs, the XR4Ti faced a host of issues. Name confusion. Merkur XR4Ti? It sounded like a sci-fi robot. Salespeople struggled to explain what it was. Consumers had no idea where it fit. Was it a Mercury, a German car, a Ford? Dealer network. Sold only through select Lincoln Mercury dealers. Many salespeople didn't understand or care about it. Service departments hated working on it due to unfamiliar German parts and complicated electronics. Parts availability. Many components were unique to the XR4Ti or imported from Europe. This led to long repair times, expensive parts, and headaches for owners. Build quality and reliability. Despite being built by Karmann in Germany, early models had rattles, interior wear, electrical problems, and turbocharger failures. The climate system was notorious for being difficult to fix and never working right. Powertrain and performance. Under the hood, the XR4Ti had a turbocharged 2.3-liter inline-4, the same basic engine found in the Mustang SVO and Thunderbird Turbo Coupe. Horsepower: 175 horsepower manual, 145 horsepower automatic. Torque: a strong 200 pound-foot. Transmission: 5-speed manual or 3-speed automatic. Drivetrain: rear-wheel drive. Suspension, fully independent with rear trailing arms, rare for an American-sold car at the time. Performance was impressive. 0 to 60 miles per hour in around 7.5 seconds, manual. Top speed near 130 miles per hour. Excellent handling balance with responsive steering and minimal body roll. So, what went wrong? Almost everything else. Problems and confusion. Despite strong specs, the XR4T faced a host of issues. Name confusion. Merkur XR4Ti? It sounded like a sci-fi robot. Salespeople struggled to explain what it was. Consumers had no idea where it fit. Was it a Mercury, a German car, a Ford? Dealer network. Sold only through select Lincoln Mercury dealerships. Many salespeople didn't understand or care about it. Service departments hated working on it due to unfamiliar German parts and complicated electronics. Parts availability. Many components were unique to the XR4T or imported from Europe. This led to long repair times, expensive parts, and headaches for owners. Build quality and reliability. Despite being built by Karmann in Germany, early models had rattles, interior wear, electrical problems, and turbocharger failures. The climate system was notorious for being difficult to fix and never working right. Emissions and cost. To meet U.S. emissions, power was reduced on automatic models. Prices were high, around $16,000 in 1985, more than a Mustang GT. Insurance was expensive due to the exotic nature of the car. The market didn't know what to do with it. The XR4T didn't fit any neat category. Too weird for mainstream buyers. Not prestigious enough for luxury buyers. Too expensive for hot hatch fans. And without a motorsports pedigree in the US, its performance didn't mean much to American drivers. Buyers shopping for a sporty German car usually wanted a BMW, not a strange import with a made-up name sold at a Mercury dealership. Despite Ford's hope that the Merkur brand would grow, it never caught on. The XR4T was joined by the Merkur Scorpio in 1988, a larger luxury hatchback, but sales continued to decline. By 1989, the Merkur brand was dead, and with it, the XR4T. Fewer than 43,000 units were sold in total over 5 years, less than Ford hoped to sell annually. Today, the 1985 Merkur XR4T is a cult classic among a small group of enthusiasts. Some admire its bold styling and European handling. Others enjoy modifying the turbo 2.3 engine, which has Mustang-level tuning potential. But most car fans remember it as a weird misfire, too different, too confusing, and too poorly marketed to succeed. It lives on as a reminder that even good cars can fail if nobody knows what they are or why they exist. The 1985 Merkur XR4T was a car ahead of its time, but wearing the wrong badge and speaking a language buyers didn't understand. It had the bones of a great European sport coupe, but it arrived in a market that wasn't ready to embrace it, and through dealers who couldn't explain it. It was fast, funky, and full of potential, but it was also flawed, expensive, and misunderstood. The XR4T isn't remembered for changing the industry, but rather as a noble experiment gone wrong, and one of the strangest footnotes in Ford's long history.
Number 3. The 1987 Cadillac Allante. This was Cadillac's answer to the growing European luxury roadster market, aimed at challenging the likes of the Mercedes-Benz SL and Jaguar XJS. On paper, it sounded like a recipe for success. In practice, it turned into a masterclass in overcomplication, poor engineering synergy, and unmet expectations. By the 1980s, Cadillac was facing an image crisis. Once the definitive American luxury brand, it was rapidly losing its prestige to European automakers. Buyers who once dreamt of driving a big Eldorado were now turning towards svelte BMWs and refined Mercedes convertibles. To counter this, GM came up with an idea: pair Italian design flair with American power.
Cadillac would collaborate with Pininfarina, the famed Italian design house responsible for styling Ferraris and Peugeots, to create a halo vehicle. The result? The Allante, Cadillac's first two-seater since the 1950s. Production complexity, the world's longest assembly line. One of the Allante's most notorious features wasn't even on the spec sheet. It was the production process. The bodies were hand-assembled in Turin, Italy by Pininfarina. Then they were loaded onto specially modified Boeing 747 cargo planes flown across the Atlantic to Detroit. In Michigan, Cadillac installed the drivetrain and completed final assembly. This process was internally called the Allante Air Bridge, and while it was impressive logistically, it added a huge amount of cost and complexity. GM spent tens of millions on this arrangement, an expensive way to get some Italian flair. The Allante's body was undeniably clean and elegant. It looked European but restrained, almost too restrained. It lacked the aggressiveness of a Jaguar or the confidence of a Mercedes SL. The front-wheel drive platform, borrowed from the Cadillac Eldorado, didn't help. It gave the car awkward proportions and a high cowl that limited the long hood, short deck look of its rivals. The hardtop convertible roof was heavy and awkward to remove. The interior, while leather-lined and full of tech for its time, felt more like a fancy Oldsmobile than a $55,000 luxury convertible. Powertrain and performance, misaligned ambitions. Under the hood was Cadillac's 4.1-liter V8, a motor notorious for being underpowered and fragile. It made just 170 horsepower, woefully inadequate for a two-seat roadster costing as much as a Mercedes. Mated to a 4-speed automatic transmission, acceleration was sluggish. 0 to 60 took around 10 seconds. The car was front-wheel drive, which simply wasn't what buyers in this segment expected. Handling was better than most Cadillacs of the era, thanks to a stiffer chassis and independent suspension, but it still couldn't compete with German rivals for steering feel or performance. Technology overload and under-delivering. Cadillac stuffed the Allante with advanced technology. Digital dash displays, electronic climate control, a problematic touchscreen interface in some models, anti-lock brakes and traction control. Unfortunately, many of these systems were buggy, unintuitive, or failed with age, damaging Cadillac's reputation even further. Despite heavy promotion, the Allante never came close to its sales targets. In 1987, fewer than 4,000 units were sold. Cadillac updated the engine multiple times in a desperate attempt to make the car competitive, culminating in the 1993 model with the Northstar V8, but by then it was too late. In total, Cadillac sold around 21,000 Allantes over a 7-year run. Meanwhile, Mercedes sold more SLs in a single year. The Allante is a fascinating example of how ambition, overconfidence, and poor integration can derail a luxury project. Cadillac thought it could buy back prestige with Italian styling and air freight logistics. But the car failed to live up to the expectations its price tag and marketing created. Instead of being a competitor to Mercedes, it became an overpriced LeBaron with an identity crisis. Today, it's remembered mostly by collectors and automotive historians, not for its excellence, but for its audacity. The Cadillac Allante was a bold idea with international flair, but lacked the performance, identity, and quality to compete in the luxury convertible space. It became a cautionary tale of style over substance.
Number 2. The 1980 Ford Pinto cruising wagon. Imagine taking a car already known for controversy, giving it a tiny station wagon body, slapping some bubble windows and stripes on the side, and hoping it would appeal to the cruising crowd. That was Ford's plan. The result? A weird little box on wheels that confused buyers and has aged like shag carpet in the rain. Let's start with the basics. The Ford Pinto, introduced in 1971, was Ford's answer to the influx of small, fuel-efficient imports from Japan and Europe. But instead of being remembered as a practical economy car, it became infamous for exploding gas tanks, poor quality, and cost-cutting so brutal that safety took a back seat. So, by the late 1970s, the Pinto name was already tarnished. Yet Ford, in a moment of pure marketing optimism, decided to jazz it up with a styling package meant to emulate the custom van craze sweeping America at the time. The cruising wagon was essentially a Pinto wagon dressed up in disco clothes. Porthole windows on the rear side panels, a nod to custom vans, but on a much smaller, sillier scale. Bold side stripes in wild colors like red, orange, and yellow. Think lava lamp turned into graphics. A shag-inspired interior option, including faux wood trim and patterned vinyl seats. Available slotted wheels, spoilers, and blackout trim to complete the custom look. Ford marketed it as a youth-oriented car with attitude, a way to get that boogie van look without the price tag or fuel costs of a full-size Ecoline. Underneath the wild graphics, though, was still a Pinto. Base engine, a sluggish 2.3-liter inline-4 making around 88 horsepower. Optional 2.8-liter V6, though it still struggled under the added weight of the wagon body. Performance? Not great. 0 to 60 in over 13 seconds. And that's when everything was working. The Pinto cruising wagon was built for style, not speed. But even as a cruiser, it felt underwhelming. It offered all the show and none of the go. Inside, the cruising wagon tried to sell lifestyle on a budget. Optional two-tone interiors with stripes and contrasting panels, bucket seats with vinyl, thin padding, and questionable ergonomics. The dashboard was still the same basic Pinto setup: cheap plastics, awkward switchgear, and the unmistakable smell of cost-cutting. Though meant to evoke the custom van scene, it felt more like a child's attempt at copying something cool using leftovers from a department store clearance bin. The cruising wagon's target audience was young drivers who wanted style on a shoestring. But this market didn't want retro van flair pasted onto a compact economy car with no street cred. Custom van lovers had real vans with V8s and mural paint jobs. Performance buyers laughed at the Pinto's reputation and performance. Practical buyers didn't care about bubble windows or side stripes. It sat in an awkward middle ground where almost no one wanted it. The Pinto cruising wagon quietly disappeared after 1980, along with the Pinto itself. By then, the custom van trend was fading, and the public's patience with anything Pinto branded had long worn out. Today, it's a rare curiosity. Some collect them ironically. Others see it as a symbol of how far automakers were willing to go chasing fads. And many have forgotten it ever existed. But in the right context, say parked at a Radwood show next to a Dodge street van and a velvet rope, the cruising wagon is a snapshot of a time when style trumped common sense. The 1980 Ford Pinto cruising wagon wasn't just a quirky special edition. It was the last gasp of a dying nameplate trying desperately to stay relevant by borrowing from another trend. Unfortunately, it failed to appeal to either audience, van lovers or economy car buyers, and ended up as little more than a disco-era automotive footnote. Number 1. The 1971 Volkswagen 411. Known as the largest air-cooled, rear-engine sedan Volkswagen ever made, the 411 was supposed to bridge the gap between the iconic Beetle and more mature, family-oriented buyers. Instead, it offered a confusing mix of awkward design, outdated engineering, and underwhelming performance, ultimately becoming a footnote in VW's growing pains. Background: outgrowing the Beetle. By the late 1960s, Volkswagen had a serious identity crisis. The Beetle was beloved but dated, tiny, loud, slow, and basic. The Type 3, notchback, fastback, and squareback, tried to upscale the brand but didn't go far enough. Competitors from France, Italy, and Japan were producing more modern front-engine sedans with better comfort, performance, and handling. So VW turned to something larger, the Type 4, introduced in Europe in 1968 as the Volkswagen 411 and brought to the US in 1971. Design: big, blobby, and bland. The 411 was designed by Pininfarina, but you wouldn't know it. It had a bulbous body with awkward proportions. The fastback and wagon versions looked top-heavy and graceless. The front end, with its flat nose and wide-set headlights, lacked personality. The high beltline and small greenhouse made it feel claustrophobic from inside. Volkswagen was going for executive styling on a budget. Instead, the 411 looked like a Beetle that had been inflated unevenly with a bicycle pump. Engineering, the last and worst of the rear-engine line? The 411 stuck with rear-engine air-cooled architecture, which was already obsolete by 1971. 1.7-liter flat-4 engine based on the Porsche 914, producing about 80 horsepower. Bosch D-Jetronic fuel injection, a novelty for VW, but early versions were glitchy and unreliable. A rear-mounted engine with a front trunk, which meant luggage space was split and awkward. The engine bay was hot and cramped, complicating maintenance and causing frequent overheating. VW was desperately trying to make a rear-engine platform feel modern, but by this point, the layout was a mechanical mismatch. The 411 was bigger and heavier than previous VWs, but didn't have the power, handling, or cooling to keep up. Driving experience, a whale in the wrong era. The 411 was positioned as an upscale car, a poor man's Mercedes, if you will, but the driving experience didn't match. The engine was underpowered, particularly when paired with the optional automatic transmission. Handling was floaty and vague, with rear-heavy bias and limited cornering grip. The front suspension used struts, which was a step forward, but the rest of the chassis couldn't keep up. Cabin noise, vibration, and heat from the rear engine made long drives fatiguing. It wasn't refined, it wasn't fun, it wasn't Beetle Simple or Audi Premium. It landed in the middle of nowhere. Inside, 1970s VW meets faux luxury. Inside, the 411 made modest efforts to seem more premium. Padded dash with faux wood applique. More generous seating space than the Beetle. Optional automatic transmission, which was rare for VW at the time. But quality control was inconsistent and the HVA system was weak, especially with a heater dependent on engine heat. It felt like Volkswagen had crammed every executive touch they could into a platform that wasn't designed to support it. Sales and reception: too expensive, too confused. When the 411 landed in the US in 1971, it confused American buyers. Too expensive for VW loyalists who wanted cheap and simple. Not refined or reliable enough for buyers cross-shopping with Volvo, Peugeot, or Audi. Too big for a compact, too small for a family car. Sales were lukewarm at best, and the car was quickly updated into the 412 in 1973, which didn't fare much better. The whole Type 4 project was shelved by 1974, just as Volkswagen shifted focus to front-engine, water-cooled platforms like the Dasher, Passat, and Golf Rabbit. The 411 is now largely forgotten, and for good reason. It was a last gasp for the rear-engine VW. It tried to leap forward technologically, but kept one foot in the past. Mechanical complexity and styling made it unloved by enthusiasts and casual buyers alike. Still, it deserves a place in history as a transitional vehicle, marking the end of one era and the awkward beginning of another. The 1971 Volkswagen 411 was an experiment gone sideways, trying to expand the brand beyond its Beetle roots without committing to a modern platform or design language. It was bold in concept but poorly executed and landed with a dull thud in the US market. VW wanted it to be their new flagship, but it couldn't even compete with the middle class. In short, the 411 was the automotive equivalent of putting a suit on someone still wearing flip-flops underneath. A mismatch in every way, and a cautionary tale in car design and brand identity.